The moment Richard Hayes called his wife worthless, he had no idea the entire room was about to witness the beginning of his downfall. The crystal chandelier above the dining room glittered like ice, throwing pale light across the long mahogany table where the Hayes family had gathered for what Richard called a celebration. There were silver trays, champagne glasses, white roses in tall vases, and guests dressed like they had stepped out of a magazine. But Emily Carter Hayes stood near the end of the table in a simple navy dress, holding a glass of water no one had offered to refill. She had learned, after 3 years in that house, that silence was sometimes safer than begging to be seen. Richard stood beside his mother, Margaret, smiling with the lazy confidence of a man who believed every wall, every dollar, and every person in the room belonged to him. "Before dessert," he said, tapping his glass with a spoon, "I think we should be honest about family." A few guests laughed politely. Emily looked down at the wedding ring on her finger. Richard turned toward her, and his smile sharpened. Emily came into this house with nothing. No family name anyone cared about. No money. No connections. Just a sad little suitcase and a talent for looking helpless. Margaret lowered her eyes, hiding a smirk behind her champagne flute. Richard's sister, Caroline, lifted her phone as if the humiliation were entertainment worth saving. Emily felt every face turned toward her, but she did not move. She remembered William Hayes, Richard's grandfather, sitting in his study months earlier with a blanket over his knees and kindness in his tired eyes. She remembered his hand closing around hers as he whispered, "When they finally show you who they are, do not interrupt them." So Emily said nothing. Richard mistook her silence for weakness. He always had. "And when this marriage is over," he continued, louder now, "she'll leave exactly the way she arrived, empty-handed." The room went so quiet that Emily could hear the soft hum of the heating vents. Then the front doorbell rang. Once. Firm. Final. A housekeeper crossed the foyer and opened the door. An older man in a dark suit stepped inside, carrying a black leather folder against his chest. His eyes searched the room, passed over Richard, ignored Margaret, and landed on Emily. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "I'm Samuel Brooks, attorney for the late William Hayes. He left specific instructions for me to speak with you tonight." For the first time that evening, Richard did not have a clever sentence ready. He stared at Samuel Brooks as if the attorney had walked into the wrong house, at the wrong hour, with the wrong name on his lips. Margaret set her champagne flute down so carefully that it made no sound against the table, but the movement revealed more panic than grace. Caroline lowered her phone halfway, still recording, her smile caught somewhere between amusement and confusion. Emily remained still, but her fingers tightened around the glass of water in her hand. She had known this night would come. She had not known it would arrive in the middle of Richard's cruelty, with every guest watching, every whispered insult still hanging in the air like smoke. Samuel Brooks took one step farther into the dining room. He was a lean man in his late 60s, with silver hair, polished shoes, and the quiet authority of someone who had spent his life watching powerful families destroy themselves over things they claimed not to care about. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, though his tone made it clear he was not apologizing at all. "But Mr. William Hayes gave me a very specific instruction. If Mrs. Emily Hayes was publicly insulted in this home before the formal reading of his will, I was to deliver a sealed notice immediately." Richard gave a short laugh, the kind he used when he wanted others to believe he was calm. "That is absurd. My grandfather has been gone for 3 weeks, Mr. Brooks. Whatever private drama you think you are creating here can wait until tomorrow morning." Samuel did not look at him. The instruction was not for tomorrow morning. Then he turned fully to Emily. It was for tonight. Emily felt the room shift. Not physically, but emotionally, like everyone had suddenly leaned toward her without moving their chairs. She could feel Richard's anger warming the air beside her. She could feel Margaret calculating, Caroline listening, the guests pretending they had not come alive with curiosity. Richard stepped forward. "Emily has no business with my grandfather's estate." Samuel finally looked at him, and there was no fear in his eyes. "That is not your decision, Mr. Hayes." The words landed with a quiet force. Richard's jaw tightened. Emily knew that look. It was the same look he had worn on the morning he brought home the prenuptial agreement, 3 years earlier, before the wedding flowers had even been ordered. Back then, She had been sitting in the breakfast nook of his Manhattan apartment, wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and the hopeful expression of a woman who still believed love could be protected by patience. Richard had placed a thick document in front of her beside a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. "It is just paperwork," he had said, sliding a pen across the table. "My family has assets. Houses, investments, old money. You understand." Emily had looked down at the pages. She saw legal words she did not fully understand. Clauses about separate property, inheritance, spousal claims, confidentiality, and voluntary waiver. She saw her name typed beside as like it belonged to someone else. "Do you think I am marrying you for money?" she had asked softly. Richard had sighed, as if her feelings were an inconvenience. "I think people become unrealistic when money is involved. This protects everyone." "Everyone," she repeated. He reached for her hand then, and for one brief second, he almost sounded gentle. "Emily, if this marriage is real, the document will never matter." That was the first lesson Richard taught her. People with power often call distress protection. Later that week, Margaret invited Emily to lunch at a private club where the white tablecloths were pressed so sharply they looked untouched by human hands. Margaret ordered sparkling water, looked Emily over with the careful politeness of a woman examining a bargain item, and said, "You seem sweet, dear. But sweetness does not manage a family like ours." Emily had smiled because she did not know what else to do. "I am not trying to manage anything." Margaret leaned back. "Good. Then signing should be easy." Caroline, who had come late and spent most of lunch scrolling on her phone, laughed under her breath. "Honestly, it is kind of romantic. Prove you are not a gold digger by making sure you can never be one." Emily remembered the heat rising in her face. She remembered wanting Richard to defend her when she told him about it that night. Instead, he had loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and said, "My mother is direct, but she is not wrong. You have to see this from our side. Our side. Not their side. Not my mother's side. Our side." That was the day Emily understood she had entered the Hayes family alone. Still, she signed. Not because she was weak. Not because she did not understand humiliation. She signed because 2 days before the wedding, William Hayes asked to see her privately at the family estate in Connecticut, a stone house surrounded by maple trees and a driveway, so long it felt like a road to another world. William was already ill then, though the family spoke about it in careful half-sentences. He sat in his study with an old wool blanket over his knees, one hand resting on a cane, the other on a leather-bound book he never opened. Unlike Richard, William did not look at people as if measuring what they could give him. He looked as if he was trying to see what life had cost them. "They are making you sign," he said. It was not a question. Emily folded her hands in her lap. "Richard says it is normal for families like this." William's mouth turned in a sad smile. "Families like this normalize many things they should be ashamed of." Emily looked toward the closed study door. "I do not want money, Mr. Hayes." "I know. Then why does everyone act like I am trying to steal something?" William's eyes softened. "Because people who worship money cannot imagine anyone else living without kneeling to it." She had not known what to say to that. William motioned toward the chair closer to him. When Emily moved, he lowered his voice. "I am going to ask something unfair of you." "What is it?" "Sign whatever they put in front of you." Emily blinked. "Why?" "Because if you refuse, they will hide themselves. They will become polite. They will perform kindness until they get what they want." He looked toward the window where the early autumn light was turning the lawn gold. "But if you sign, they will believe you are harmless. And when people believe you are harmless, they stop pretending." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Are you testing them?" William shook his head slowly. "No. They have already failed many tests. I am documenting the final one." He opened the drawer of his desk and took out a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. Her name was written on the front in his careful handwriting. Emily Carter. Not Emily Hayes. Not Mrs. Richard Hayes. Her own name. "Keep this somewhere safe," he said. "Do not open it because you are hurt. Do not open it because you are lonely. Open it only when they have shown you, beyond all doubt, that they value your silence more than your heart." Emily took the envelope with both hands. "I do not understand." "You will." His voice grew quieter. "And when you do, remember this. Silence is not surrender when it is chosen." That sentence stayed with her through every dinner where Margaret corrected her manners, every party where Caroline introduced her as Richard's little charity project. Every morning Richard left before breakfast and returned after midnight with the smell of expensive restaurants on his coat and no explanation in his mouth. Emily kept the envelope in a small metal lockbox beneath folded sweaters in the closet Richard never opened because he assumed nothing of value could be there. Over time, she learned the shape of her life in the Hayes house. She learned which rooms went quiet when she entered. She learned which smiles meant pity and which meant warning. She learned that Richard liked her best when she was useful, silent, and grateful. He enjoyed telling people she preferred a simple life, as if simplicity were the same as having no choice. He bought her modest gifts in public and withdrew affection in private, never loudly enough for outsiders to notice, never kindly enough for her to forget. But William noticed. During the first year of the marriage, Emily began visiting him every Thursday. Richard thought she went because she had nothing better to do. Margaret thought she went to secure sympathy. Caroline joked that Emily had found the only Hayes man old enough to tolerate her. None of them knew that William waited for those visits as if they were fresh air. Emily brought him homemade soup in glass containers, helped organize his books, listened to stories about the company before it became a battlefield, and sat with him through long afternoons when pain made conversation difficult. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Sometimes they simply watched the rain crawl down the windows of his study. One November afternoon, William asked, "Does my grandson make you happy?" Emily kept her eyes on the tea she was stirring. "He is under pressure." William gave a tired laugh. "That was not my question." She did not answer. He did not force her to. He only said, "A woman should not have to shrink to fit inside a man's pride." Those words nearly broke something open in her, but Emily swallowed the feeling and smiled. "You sound like my mother." Was she wise? Very. Then listen to both of us. After William's health worsened, Emily was the one who noticed when the night nurse skipped notes, when prescriptions were delayed, when a specialist in Boston could see him sooner if someone made the call. Richard complained that medical details made him uncomfortable. Margaret said William hated fuss. Caroline posted childhood photos with captions about family legacy, but rarely stayed longer than 20 minutes. Emily quietly drove over an hour each way, sometimes in rain, sometimes through snow, sometimes after Richard had mocked her for caring too much about a dying old man who was not even her blood. Once, when a private consultation cost more than Emily had in her checking account, she sold the old blue Toyota she had owned before the marriage. Richard never noticed it was gone for 8 days. When he finally did, he said, "At least the driveway looks better." Emily said nothing. William saw everything. Now, standing in the Hayes dining room with Samuel Brooks holding the black leather folder, Emily felt every hidden year pressing against the present. Richard had believed the signed papers erased her. Margaret had believed manners could bury cruelty. Caroline had believed humiliation became harmless if it was funny enough to record. But Samuel's arrival had cracked the surface, and through that crack, something long buried was beginning to rise. Richard turned toward Emily, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear, but sharp enough to cut. "What did you do?" Emily looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a husband, not a partner, not the man she had once tried to love, but a frightened heir who had just realized the woman he dismissed might know more than he did. "I did what you asked, Richard," she said quietly. I stayed silent. Samuel stepped beside her and held out a sealed notice. The wax was the same dark blue as the envelope hidden in her lockbox upstairs. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "before tomorrow's reading, Mr. William Hayes wanted you to have this." Emily took it, and for the first time all night, Richard looked at her hands as if they might be holding the future he had already lost. Emily did not open the sealed notice at the table. That alone seemed to disturb Richard more than if she had torn it apart in front of everyone. He watched the blue wax in her hand with a kind of stunned impatience, as if the envelope had insulted him by existing beyond his control. Around them, the dinner guests sat trapped between manners and fascination. No one reached for dessert. No one lifted a glass. Even Caroline's phone had lowered until it rested against the edge of her plate, still pointed toward Emily, as if some part of her knew the moment was becoming too valuable to miss. Samuel Brooks gave a small nod. Mr. Hayes also instructed that Mrs. Hayes be allowed to read that privately. Richard's eyes snapped toward him. "This is still my house." Samuel's expression did not change. Technically, Mr. Hayes, until the estate is settled, that is a legal assumption, not a fact. A thin silence spread through the room. Margaret inhaled sharply, then covered it with a soft laugh that fooled no one. Samuel, surely this is unnecessary. William was ill. He said many dramatic things near the end. The attorney turned to her with calm precision. Your father-in-law was of sound mind when every document was prepared, reviewed, witnessed, and recorded. Margaret's smile stiffened. Recorded? Yes. The word was plain, but it struck the room like a dropped glass. Emily felt Richard move closer to her. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to make his anger feel personal. Give me the envelope, he said quietly. Emily looked at him. 3 years ago, that tone would have made her apologize before she knew what she had done wrong. 2 years ago, she would have handed him whatever he asked for just to keep the evening from getting worse. 1 year ago, she might have hidden her shaking hands and called it peace. But tonight, with William's handwriting pressed against her palm, she finally understood that silence had never meant she belonged to Richard. No, she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Richard's face changed before he could stop it. The charming husband disappeared, and the man beneath him showed through for just a second, irritated, exposed, and used to being refused by the woman he had trained everyone to overlook. Margaret stood. Emily, dear, do not embarrass yourself. This is clearly a misunderstanding. Emily turned to her. I think the misunderstanding is that you believed I would keep being embarrassed for everyone else. Caroline gave a nervous laugh. Wow, where was this version of you hiding? Emily looked at the phone in Caroline's hand. You have been recording all night. You probably know. Caroline's smile faded, and she placed the phone face down. Richard recovered quickly, or tried to. He faced the guests with a polished expression. Everyone, I apologize. Family legal matters are sometimes messy. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. But no one moved, because nobody believed the evening still belonged to him. Samuel closed the black folder and spoke with the same, even tone. The formal reading remains scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in the study. Attendance is required for named parties. Named parties, Margaret repeated. Her eyes slid to Emily. Including her? Especially her, Samuel said. Richard looked as if he had swallowed something bitter. When Samuel left, the front door closing behind him with a soft click, the dining room seemed smaller. The chandelier still glittered. The silver still shone. The white roses still stood untouched. But the room had lost the illusion that money could make humiliation elegant. Emily excused herself without waiting for permission and walked toward the staircase, the envelope held at her side. Richard followed before she reached the first landing. Emily. She kept walking. Emily, stop. She stopped because she chose to, not because he ordered it. He stood 2 steps below her, forcing himself to speak softly now that the guests could still hear from the dining room. Whatever my grandfather told you, you need to understand something. He was emotional at the end. He was lonely. You spent time with him, and maybe he became confused about what that meant. Emily studied him. He was not confused when you stopped visiting. Richard's mouth tightened. I was running the company. You were waiting for him to die so you could inherit it. His eyes flashed, but he lowered. His voice even more. Be careful. I have been careful for 3 years. Richard glanced down the hallway, then leaned in slightly. If that envelope contains anything that affects the estate, you show it to me before anyone else. Why would I do that? Because you are my wife. The words would have meant something once. Now they sounded like paperwork pretending to be love. Emily looked at the ring on her finger. You remembered that very suddenly. Richard's expression cooled. Do not turn this into some emotional performance. We both know what this marriage is. Do we? Yes. I gave you a life you could never have had on your own. Emily almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because he still believed that a house without kindness counted as a gift. You gave me rooms I was not welcome in, dinners where I was discussed like a mistake, and a last name your family used like a leash. Richard stared at her, shocked less by the words than by the fact that she had spoken them. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded document. Then let us end the performance. He held it out. Divorce papers. Emily looked at the pages, then back at him. The timing was so perfectly cruel that she almost felt sorry for the version of herself who would have been surprised. You brought those to your anniversary dinner? I planned to handle it privately after the guests left. How considerate. Sign tonight. and I will make sure you have enough to start over comfortably. A small apartment. Moving costs. Maybe 6 months of expenses. He said it like mercy. He said it like she should thank him for pricing her dignity. Emily did not take the papers. And if I do not sign? Richard's smile returned, but it was thin now. Then tomorrow becomes very uncomfortable for you. My family has attorneys too, Emily. You signed a prenuptial agreement. You waive claims. You have no leverage. From the bottom of the staircase, Margaret's voice floated up. Richard, do not negotiate in the hallway. She appeared below them, one hand on the banister, her posture controlled but her eyes alert. Caroline stood behind her, pretending she was not listening. Margaret climbed a few steps, her pearls catching the light. Emily, you are upset. Understandably. Samuel made a scene, and William was fond of you. But fondness is not ownership. It is not authority. It is not a seat at the table. Emily glanced at the envelope. Then why are you all so afraid of what he gave me? Margaret's face hardened. For the first time since Emily had known her, the older woman did not find a polite mask quickly enough. Because young women who arrive with nothing often learn to take by appearing helpless. Emily felt something inside her go very still. Is that what you think I did? I think my father-in-law was old, sick, and sentimental. I think you spent a great deal of time alone with him. I think you made yourself useful at exactly the right moment. Richard looked relieved that his mother had said what he wanted to say, but was too careful to put plainly. Caroline folded her arms. Mom is just saying what everyone is thinking. Emily nodded slowly. Then everyone should be at the reading tomorrow. Richard extended the divorce papers again. No, you should sign these tonight and leave before morning. That was the truth at last. Not concern, not confusion, not wounded pride. Fear. They wanted her gone before the will was read. The realization settled over Emily with strange calm. William had told her they would stop pretending when they believed she was harmless. But now they were pretending again because they suspected she was not. She looked at Richard's hand holding the papers. You want me to leave before hearing a legal document where I am apparently a named party. I want to spare you embarrassment. No, Emily said. You want to spare yourself witnesses. Margaret stepped closer. Do not overestimate your position. Emily turned toward her bedroom door at the top of the stairs. I have underestimated it long enough. Richard moved to follow, but Emily stopped and looked back. If you take one more step after me tonight, I will ask Samuel Brooks to return with whatever recording your grandfather mentioned, and I will ask Caroline to upload the video she has been taking since dessert. Caroline's eyes widened. I was not going to upload it. Good, Emily said. Then keep being wise. She went into the bedroom and closed the door behind her. For a moment, she stood in the quiet, breathing in the faint scent of lavender from the drawer sachet she had bought herself because Richard never noticed what made a room feel less lonely. The bedroom was beautiful in the way showrooms were beautiful, all cream fabric, framed art, and windows overlooking dark lawns. But Emily had never felt at home there. She crossed to the closet, knelt beside a stack of folded sweaters, and pulled out the small metal lockbox. Her hands were steady now. She set William's new sealed notice beside the older envelope he had given her before the wedding. The same blue wax. The same careful handwriting. One had waited 3 years. One had arrived tonight. Emily opened the older envelope first. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key taped to the bottom. The note was brief, written in William's hand. Emily, if you are reading this, then they have mistaken your patience for permission. Tomorrow, do not defend yourself. Let them speak. Let them reveal the truth out loud. Samuel has everything else. The key is for the drawer in my study that Richard believes is empty. Trust the timing. Trust yourself. Emily read the note twice. Then she picked up the brass key and closed her fingers around it. Outside the bedroom, voices murmured in the hallway. Richard, Margaret, Caroline, planning, whispering, deciding what version of tomorrow they could still control. Emily looked toward the dark window, where her reflection stared back at her in the navy dress Richard had mocked. She was still the same woman who had walked into dinner with a glass of water no one refilled. But something had changed. Not in the house. Not in the will. In her. For the first time, Emily was not waiting to be chosen, defended, or believed. She was waiting for morning. Morning arrived behind a curtain of gray Connecticut rain, soft enough to make the windows blur, steady enough to make the whole house feel sealed from the outside world. Emily had not slept much, but she did not feel tired in the way she expected. She felt clear. At 9:45, she stood before the mirror in the bedroom and fastened a simple pearl button at her collar. She chose a charcoal dress Richard had once called too plain for his circles, brushed her hair neatly behind her shoulders, and placed William's brass key in the pocket of her coat. The sealed notice Samuel had delivered the night before remained unopened on the desk. The older letter lay beside it, folded with care. She did not need to read either again. She knew what William had asked of her. Let them speak. Let them reveal the truth out loud. When Emily stepped into the hallway, Richard was already waiting near the staircase in a dark suit, his expression freshly polished for an audience. He looked at her clothes, then at her empty hands. Smart, he said. No dramatic props. Emily walked past him. Good morning, Richard. He followed beside her, lowering his voice as they descended. There is still time to make this civilized. Was last night civilized? Last night was emotional. It was honest. He stopped on the landing. Do not confuse a few embarrassing comments with leverage. Emily looked back at him. I am not confused. In the foyer below, Margaret stood arranging white lilies in a vase, though the flowers had already been arranged by someone else. She wore cream silk and pearls, the uniform of a woman determined to look innocent under pressure. Caroline sat in the front room with her phone in her lap, pale and quiet, no longer enjoying the story she had helped create. At exactly 10 o'clock, Samuel Brooks entered without waiting to be welcomed. Behind him came a younger woman carrying a laptop bag and a stack of bound folders. This is Angela Reed, Samuel said. She is my associate and a witness for the reading. Richard gave a cold smile. How formal. Samuel removed his coat. Your grandfather insisted on formal. They moved into William's study, the one room in the house that still felt like him. Dark wood shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A leather chair sat near the fireplace. The large desk faced the rain-streaked windows, and beside it stood the drawer Emily now knew was not empty. She did not look at it for long. She took a seat near the end of the room, away from the desk, away from Richard, away from the family portrait in which everyone looked wealthy and no one looked kind. Richard sat at the center, as if the chair itself could prove ownership. Margaret sat to his right. Caroline took the chair closest to the door. Samuel placed the black leather folder on the desk, opened it, and looked around the room. Before I begin, I need to confirm that all named parties are present. Richard Hayes, Margaret Hayes, Caroline Hayes, Emily Carter Hayes. Richard's eyes flicked toward Emily at the use of her full name. Why is she listed separately from me? Samuel looked down at the document. Because Mr. William Hayes listed her separately. For what purpose? You will know when I read. Richard leaned back, but his hand gripped the armrest. Samuel began with the standard language, the legal formalities, the dates, the witnesses, the declaration that William Hayes had signed the will voluntarily and with full understanding. His voice was steady, almost plain, but every word seemed to tighten the room. At first, the provisions sounded predictable. Personal items to longtime staff members. Donations to the Children's Hospital in Hartford. A scholarship fund in William's late wife's name. Margaret relaxed slightly. Richard's shoulders settled. Caroline looked bored enough to glance at her phone. Then Samuel turned a page. Regarding the Hayes family estate, including but not limited to the primary residence in Connecticut, the Manhattan apartment, the lake property in Vermont, the family investment accounts, and controlling shares held through Hayes Legacy Holdings, Mr. William Hayes established the Hayes Family Continuity Trust. Richard's mouth curved. Of course he did. Samuel continued. The trust is not to be dissolved, sold, leveraged, or transferred for a minimum period of 7 years following Mr. Hayes's death. Margaret frowned. 7 years. Correct, Samuel said. Richard sat forward. That is inconvenient, but manageable. As primary heir, I can still direct the trust. Samuel paused. Not long. Just enough for Emily to hear the rain tapping at the glass behind him. No, Mr. Hayes. You cannot. Richard stared at him. Excuse me. Samuel adjusted the page. Mr. Hayes appointed a sole trustee with full administrative authority over distributions, property decisions, voting control, and family governance matters related to the trust. Margaret's fingers tightened around her purse. Caroline stopped looking at her phone. Richard gave a small laugh. Then read the name. Samuel did. Emily Carter Hayes. For a moment, no one spoke. The The silence was not empty. It was crowded with every insult, every assumption, every dinner where Emily had been treated like furniture in a house she was never meant to own. Richard turned slowly toward her, his face drained of its careful polish. "That is not possible," Emily said. "Nothing." Samuel looked up. "It is not only possible. It is legally executed." Margaret stood halfway from her chair. "There has to be a condition." "There are several," Samuel said. "But none appoint Richard Hayes as trustee." Richard pushed his chair back. "My grandfather would never put my family's assets under her control." "He did not consider them merely assets," Samuel said. "He considered them responsibilities." Richard pointed toward Emily, his voice rising despite his effort to control it. "She has no financial background. She does not know how to run a company, manage property, or make decisions at this level. She was a nurse's aide when I met her." Emily felt the old humiliation try to find a place inside her, but there was no room for it now. Samuel remained calm. "Mr. Hayes addressed that as well. Professional management remains in place. Mrs. Hayes has oversight authority, approval rights, and fiduciary support. She is not expected to act alone." Margaret looked at Emily with open disbelief. "You knew?" Emily met her gaze. "I knew he trusted me." Richard laughed harshly. "Trusted you? You spent afternoons pouring soup and pretending to care. You let a lonely old man believe you were family." Samuel's expression changed for the first time. Not anger. Warning. "Mr. Hayes, I advise you to speak carefully." Richard ignored him. "No. I want this on record. She manipulated him." She smiled. She listened. She acted humble. And he fell for it because he was sick. Emily lowered her eyes to her hands. Not from shame, but because William's instruction echoed exactly as he had written it. Let them speak. Let them reveal the truth out loud. Samuel reached into the black folder and removed a smaller sealed envelope, then placed it on the desk between them. The blue wax matched the others. Richard stopped talking. "What is that?" Samuel said. Mr. William Hayes anticipated this objection. Margaret's voice thinned. "Samuel." He did not look at her. He left an audio statement to be played if any party accused Mrs. Hayes of manipulating him, exploiting his illness, or acting for personal gain. Richard's face tightened. Caroline whispered, "You have got to be kidding me." Samuel turned to Angela. She opened the laptop, connected a small speaker, and entered a password from the file. The room filled with a faint electronic tone as the audio loaded. Emily felt. Her heart beat once, hard, then steady. Samuel looked at Richard. "Before I play this, I will remind everyone that Mr. Hayes made this recording voluntarily, in my presence, 2 doctors having already confirmed his mental clarity." Richard stared at the speaker as if it were a witness he could not intimidate. "This is ridiculous." Samuel pressed play. William's voice entered the room, thinner than Emily remembered, but unmistakably his. "If you are hearing this, then someone in my family has done exactly what I feared. They have mistaken Emily's kindness for a scheme, because they cannot imagine kindness without profit." Margaret closed her eyes. Richard went still. Emily kept her gaze on the rain beyond the window. William's voice continued, calm and sorrowful. "Emily did not ask me for money. She did not ask me for property. She did not ask me for influence. In fact, she asked me more than once to make peace with my grandson, even when Richard had not earned that mercy." Richard's face colored with embarrassment. Samuel did not pause the recording. "I know why Richard married her. I know what Margaret told her before the wedding. I know about the prenuptial agreement, the insults, the quiet exclusions, and the little cruelties all of you believed were too small to count. They counted." Caroline's mouth parted, but no words came out. William's voice grew softer. "The difference between Emily and the rest of you is simple. When I became inconvenient, she came closer. When my own family became busy waiting for what I would leave behind, she sat beside me with no audience, no cameras, and no reward promised." Emily blinked against the pressure behind her eyes, but she did not cry. "Not yet." Then William said, "And Richard, if you are angry while hearing this, ask yourself why losing control of Emily frightens you more than losing her love ever did." The room seemed to stop breathing. Richard looked at Emily, but she did not look back. Samuel paused the recording before the final portion could play. Richard's voice came out low. "Why did you stop it?" Samuel lifted the second envelope. "Because the remaining statement concerns a conditional clause. And based on what was said last night and this morning, we now have to determine whether that clause has already been triggered. Richard stared at the sealed envelope in Samuel's hand as though the blue wax had become a door closing in front of him. Triggered by what? He asked, but his voice had lost the smooth confidence that usually made people hesitate before challenging him. Samuel did not answer immediately. He placed the envelope on the desk, beside the black leather folder, and rested one hand lightly over it. Mr. William Hayes included a conduct clause in the trust documents. It applies specifically to any beneficiary who attempts to remove, intimidate, discredit, or financially pressure the appointed trustee before or during the settlement process. Margaret stood fully now, one hand pressed to the back of her chair. That is outrageous. Samuel turned a page. It is detailed. Caroline looked between her mother and brother. Wait, what does that mean exactly? Samuel looked at her, then at Richard. It means Mr. Hayes understood that once his decision became known, someone in this family might try to force Mrs. Hayes out before she could exercise the authority he gave her. Richard gave a sharp laugh. Force her out. I offered her a divorce settlement. That is normal. Emily felt the room turn toward her again, but this time the attention did not feel like judgment. It felt like witnesses. Samuel opened another folder and removed a copy of the document Richard had handed her on the stairs the night before. This divorce agreement was delivered to Mrs. Hayes after I informed the household that she was a named party in the estate reading. Richard's eyes narrowed. Where did you get that? Emily finally spoke. You left it outside my bedroom door after I refused to sign it. Richard looked at her with disbelief. You gave it to him? I gave it to the attorney handling the will. That was private. So was my humiliation, Emily said quietly. You made that public. Margaret stepped in quickly. Samuel, even if Richard behaved poorly, a husband giving his wife divorce papers is not some criminal act. No one said it was, Samuel replied. The question is whether it violates the trust condition. Mr. Hayes was very specific. Any attempt to pressure Emily Carter Hayes into resigning, withdrawing, signing away rights, or leaving the residence before the will was read would activate review. Richard scoffed. Review? Fine. Review it. Nothing happened. I did not threaten her. I made an offer. Samuel turned to Angela. Please play the hallway. Audio. Richard went completely still. Margaret's eyes widened. Caroline whispered, Audio. Angela clicked the laptop. A brief silence passed, and then Richard's voice filled the study, low and unmistakable. Sign tonight, and I will make sure you have enough to start over comfortably. A small apartment. Moving costs. Maybe 6 months of expenses. Then Emily's voice, calm and distant. And if I do not sign? Richard's recorded answer followed. Then tomorrow becomes very uncomfortable for you. My family has attorneys too, Emily. You signed a prenuptial agreement. You waive claims. You have no leverage. Angela paused the recording. The rain against the windows sounded louder than before. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. Samuel looked at him. Would you like to explain how that was not pressure? Richard turned toward Emily. You recorded me? No, Emily said. Your grandfather did. Samuel folded his hands. For the last year of his life, Mr. Hayes had security upgrades installed in common areas of this house after disputes arose over missing documents and unauthorized access to his study. The hallway outside the primary bedroom is considered a common corridor. The system was disclosed in household security paperwork. Margaret's face lost color. William never told us that audio was enabled. You signed the acknowledgement, Samuel said. All permanent residents did. Caroline looked at her mother. Mom. Margaret did not answer. Richard slammed his palm on the arm of his chair, not hard enough to damage anything, but loud enough to make Caroline flinch. This is insane. My grandfather turned his own house into a trap. Emily looked at him for the first time since the recording began. No, Richard. He gave you a chance to be different when you thought no one important was listening. The words were quiet, but they went straight through the room. Samuel broke the seal on the envelope. The wax cracked with a small, final sound. He unfolded a letter, scanned the page, then began to read. If this clause is being reviewed, then Richard has likely shown the same character I spent years trying not to see. I do not write this with pleasure. I write it with clarity. A man who believes love is leverage should not control a family trust. A man who measures a wife by her usefulness should not decide the future of a family name. Richard stood abruptly. Stop reading. Samuel looked up. I am obligated to continue. I said stop. Emily felt the old instinct rise inside her, the instinct to soften the room, to calm Richard, to make herself smaller so no one else had to feel embarrassed. But she let the instinct pass. Samuel continued. If Richard Hayes attempts to coerce Emily Carter Hayes into leaving, signing away rights, resigning authority, or accepting a private settlement designed to prevent her presence at the reading of my will, then his status as a discretionary beneficiary shall be suspended pending legal review by the trust protector and independent counsel. Caroline frowned. Suspended means what? Samuel answered without looking away from the page. It means Richard cannot receive distributions, use trust property for personal benefit, influence company voting shares, or direct estate assets while the review is active. Richard turned on Samuel. You cannot do that. I am not doing it, Samuel said. Your grandfather did. Margaret's voice became thin and sharp. This family built that company. Samuel looked at her. William built that company. He left instructions to preserve it from those who confused inheritance with entitlement. The line landed harder than Margaret expected. She sat down slowly, as if the chair had become the only thing holding her together. Richard looked at Emily again, but there was no apology in his face. Only calculation. You cannot run this without me. Emily held his gaze. I do not have to run it to know you should not. For the first time, Caroline's expression shifted. Not toward kindness, exactly, but toward understanding. She looked at Richard as if replaying the night before, the dinner, the jokes, the phone in her hand, the way she had treated Emily's pain like a scene meant for entertainment. Samuel placed the letter on the desk. There is more. Richard laughed under his breath, but it sounded hollow. Of course there is. Samuel turned to Angela. Play the final portion of Mr. Hayes's statement. William's voice returned to the room, softer now, but clear enough to make everyone listen. Richard, you will want to blame Emily. You will want to say she stole what was yours. But nothing given to her was taken from you. It was removed from the reach of your arrogance. Richard looked away, jaw tight. William continued. I watched you dismiss her. I watched you let your mother belittle her. I watched your sister turn Emily's loneliness into a joke. And still, Emily asked me to forgive you. That is why I trust her more than I trust any of you. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. She could see William in his study, the blanket over his knees, his hand trembling slightly as he lifted a cup of tea she had made too weak, because he could no longer tolerate it strong. She remembered how he would apologize for needing help, and how she always told him there was nothing shameful about being cared for. William's recorded voice continued. There is one thing I never told the family. When my private treatment was delayed, when paperwork sat unanswered, when I needed someone to make calls that should have been made by my own blood, Emily did it. When the consultation in Boston required immediate payment, she sold her car to cover it before anyone here even noticed the need. Richard blinked, then looked at Emily as if this was the first fact about her he had not known and could not dismiss. Margaret whispered, That cannot be true. Emily did not answer. Samuel opened another folder and removed a receipt, a transfer record, and a letter from the Boston clinic. It is documented. Caroline looked down at her hands. I remember that car, she said softly. The blue one. Emily nodded once. It got me through nursing school. Richard's expression shifted, but not enough. Pride fought with shame and nearly won. Why did you never tell me? Emily looked at him steadily. You noticed the empty space in the driveway before you noticed why it was empty. That told me everything. The words settled over him in a way no accusation could. William's recording continued. Emily did not buy my trust with money. She earned it by showing up when there was nothing to gain. That is the kind of person I want guarding what remains of my life's work. The audio paused on its own for a moment. Then William took a slow breath. And Emily, if you are hearing this, I am sorry I could not make this family love you the way you deserved. But I can make sure they never again mistake your kindness for weakness. Emily pressed her lips together, but a tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She did not wipe it away. Immediately, she let it exist, because for once, her sadness was not being used against her. Samuel closed the laptop gently. No one spoke. The study felt different now, not because the furniture had changed, but because the truth had rearranged everyone inside it. Richard stood near the center of the room, surrounded by the evidence of every moment he had considered too small to matter. Margaret looked older than she had 10 minutes before. Caroline looked ashamed, and for once, she did not try to cover it with sarcasm. Samuel gathered the documents into a neat stack. The conduct clause review begins immediately. Richard Hayes is suspended from discretionary benefit and decision access until independent counsel completes the review. Mrs. Emily Carter Hayes remains sole trustee. Richard turned to Emily with the desperate confidence of a man trying to rebuild a throne from dust. Emily, listen to me. Whatever happened, we can fix it. We do not need lawyers deciding our marriage. Emily looked at the man who had brought divorce papers to an anniversary dinner, who had called her empty-handed in front of a room full of people, who now used the word marriage only because the word control had failed him. You are right, she said. We do not. For one breath, Richard looked hopeful. Then Emily reached into her coat pocket and placed William's brass key on the desk. But before I decide what happens next, I am going to open the drawer William told me you believed was empty. Samuel's eyes flickered toward the desk. Margaret's hand flew to her pearls. Richard went pale. And in that instant, Emily understood the drawer did not just hold another document. It held the secret they had all been trying to keep buried. Emily picked up the brass key, and every person in the study watched her hand, as if it were turning the entire future of the Hayes family. The drawer was built into the lower right side of William's desk, so ordinary that Richard had probably passed it 1,000 times without imagining it could hold anything more dangerous than old stationery. Emily knelt beside it, slid the key into the lock, and turned it. The click was small, but Richard reacted as though the sound had reached something inside him. Emily, he said quickly, before you open that, you should understand that my grandfather kept many personal things. Not everything needs to become a performance. She looked over her shoulder. That is interesting, coming from the man who made my pain the entertainment at dinner. Richard's face tightened. Margaret stood again, one hand pressed to her pearls. Samuel, this is unnecessary. If William wanted that drawer opened during the reading, he would have written it into the instructions. Samuel's eyes remained on the desk. He did. Margaret fell silent. Emily opened the drawer. Inside was not a stack of money or jewelry or some dramatic family heirloom. There was a slim red binder, a flash drive sealed in a clear evidence bag, and a handwritten note with Emily's name on it. She took the note first. William's handwriting was weaker here, but still careful. Emily, this drawer contains the reason I stopped trusting my own family with the company. Do not use it for revenge. Use it for protection. She set the note on the desk, and Samuel carefully lifted the red binder. This file concerns attempted changes to Mr. Hayes's estate plan during the final months of his life. Margaret whispered. William misunderstood. Samuel opened the binder. According to these records, draft documents were prepared that would have removed Emily Carter Hayes from all estate-related references, transferred voting influence to Richard Hayes immediately upon death, and granted Margaret Hayes advisory control over the trust. Richard spoke too fast. Drafts are meaningless. Lawyers draft things all the time. These drafts were not prepared by Mr. Hayes's counsel, Samuel said. They were prepared by an outside attorney hired through a consulting account connected to Hayes Legacy Holdings. Caroline looked at Richard. You said that account was for tax planning. Richard shot her a warning look, but it came too late. The room heard it. Samuel turned one page, then another. Mr. Hayes discovered the attempt and requested an internal review. He also found emails discussing how to get him to sign while he was tired, preferably after treatment days. Margaret closed her eyes. Caroline covered her mouth with one hand. Richard's voice dropped. You are twisting private business correspondence. Emily stood slowly. Were you trying to make him sign papers he did not understand? No, Richard said. But the word was too sharp, too immediate, too frightened. Samuel removed the flash drive from the evidence bag, but did not plug it in. The contents will be transferred directly to independent counsel. We do not need to play them here unless challenged formally. Margaret sat down as if her knees had given up on dignity. Richard looked at Emily now, not with anger alone, but with the dawning awareness that she was no longer standing in front of him as his wife asking to be valued. She was standing there as trustee of the family estate, holding the authority William had given her and the evidence Richard had hoped would never see daylight. Emily, Richard said, softening his voice in a way she once might have mistaken for sincerity, you know me. I was under pressure. The company was unstable. Grandfather was making emotional decisions. I was trying to protect what he built. Emily looked at the binder, then at him. You were not protecting what he built. You were protecting your access to it. I made mistakes. No, she said quietly. You made choices. Mistakes are what people do before they know better. You knew exactly what you were doing. Samuel placed the binder back on the desk. Given the newly reviewed materials, I will recommend that the conduct clause remain active and that Richard Hayes be temporarily removed from all trust-related access pending full legal review. Richard's face hardened again. You cannot erase me from my own family. Emily almost felt the sadness of it then, how deeply he believed family was something owned, inherited, controlled, and defended like property. William had known better at the end. Maybe that was why he had trusted the only person who never treated him like a signature waiting to happen. Caroline looked up, her voice smaller than Emily had ever heard it. Emily, I am sorry. Margaret turned sharply toward her. Caroline. No. Caroline said, still looking at Emily. I was awful to you. I thought it was just jokes, but it was not. I helped make this house miserable for you. Emily studied her for a moment. An apology did not undo 3 years. But it mattered that someone in the room had finally named the truth without being forced by a legal document. Thank you for saying that, Emily replied. Richard let out a bitter laugh. Wonderful. Now everyone is performing regret because she has power. Emily turned to him. That is the difference between us, Richard. You think power creates respect. I think it reveals whether respect was ever real. He stared at her, and there was nothing left to hide behind. Not the house. Not the company. Not his family name. Not even the prenuptial agreement he had once treated like a cage. Samuel gathered the red binder, the flash drive, and William's note. Mrs. Hayes, as trustee, you have immediate authority to secure the residence, restrict access to estate records, and request temporary separation of personal and trust-related spaces. Richard looked alarmed. Meaning? Emily answered before Samuel could. Meaning you will not use this house to pressure me anymore. Margaret looked at her with disbelief. You would ask us to leave? Emily shook her head. No. William cared about this family, even when it disappointed him. I am not throwing anyone out today. Richard seemed to exhale. Then Emily continued. But Richard will move into the guest wing until my attorney files the separation agreement. Staff will receive written instructions that estate records, financial files, and William's study are restricted. Caroline may stay if she respects that. Margaret, you may remain through the week while counsel sorts the trust boundaries. Richard's voice cracked with anger. You are treating me like a stranger in my own home. Emily looked at him with a calm that had taken 3 years to earn. Last night, you told me I would leave empty-handed. Today, I am letting you stay with conditions. Learn the difference. For once, Richard had no answer. Emily picked up the divorce papers he had tried to force on her and placed them neatly on the desk. I will not sign these. Richard's eyes lifted with the smallest flash of hope. Emily saw it and ended it gently. I will have my attorney prepare new ones. The hope disappeared. Outside, the rain began to slow, and pale light pushed through the clouds over the estate grounds. Emily looked once more at William's chair by the fireplace, empty now, but no longer powerless. Then she turned back to the room. She did not feel victorious. Victory was too loud a word for what grief and truth had built together. What she felt was space. For the first time in years, the air around her belonged to her. Samuel handed her William's handwritten note. Emily folded it carefully and held it against her chest. Richard whispered her name, but this time, it did not pull her back. She walked to the door of the study, stopped, and looked at him one last time. You did not lose everything because of the will, she said. You lost it because when you had someone loyal beside you, you treated her like she was nothing. Then Emily stepped into the hallway, leaving Richard surrounded by the family legacy he had wanted so badly and the silence he had finally earned. Emily did not go back to the bedroom right away. She walked through the quiet foyer, past the dining room where the white roses from the night before were beginning to droop, and stopped at the front door. The rain had faded into mist, leaving the long driveway silver beneath the morning light. For 3 years, she had believed leaving this house would mean defeat. Now she understood that freedom did not always look like running. Sometimes it looked like standing still while the people who underestimated you finally saw the ground shift beneath them. Behind her, footsteps approached. Richard stopped several feet away, as if some invisible boundary had appeared between them. "Emily," he said, and for once there was no audience, no glass in his hand, no cruel smile waiting behind his words. "I do not know how to fix this." She turned slowly. "That is because you are still thinking about what you lost." His eyes lowered. "I lost you." Emily looked at the man she had once hoped would choose her without needing witnesses, lawyers, or consequences to teach him her value. "No, Richard. You lost me long before today. You lost me every time you let me stand alone in a room full of your family. You lost me when you thought my silence meant I had no worth." He had no answer. Maybe that was the closest thing to honesty he had left. Samuel appeared at the study door, holding another sealed packet. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "there is one final item from Mr. William Hayes. It concerns the lake property in Vermont." Emily accepted it, feeling the weight of another secret in her hands. On the front, William had written only 6 words, "For when you are ready to know." Emily looked toward the gray sky beyond the open door. She was no longer the poor wife they pitted, mocked, or tried to erase. She was the woman William had trusted. With the truth, and whatever waited at the lake house, she would face it as herself.